Just mentioned, the timing of this is highly suspect. We're 2 weeks away from the biggest election in the country, of course, in the world. We are just moments from hearing about what's gonna happen in our national political discourse. And Donald Trump and the Justice Department may well really wish to be able to point to their to the possibility of their holding tech's feet to the fire, particularly given Trump himself has implied that big tech has engaged in anti-conservative bias and suppression of conservative voices, and especially as you mentioned, given the states and the political the politicians in those states that are kind of joining the Justice Department in pushing this, it does seem quite politically motivated along these themes of anti-conservative bias.
A lot of questions around that, and of course, not the first time that big tech has come under scrutiny. That is Dipayan Ghosh from Harvard's Kennedy School joining us tonight. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Amna.
The U.S. and Russia say they are close to a major agreement on arms control. The world's largest nuclear powers are discussing extending the last remaining nuclear treaty, currently scheduled to expire in February, and freezing the total number of nuclear warheads. Nick Schifrin reports.
Today is an important milestone for nuclear security and nonproliferation.
10 years ago, the U.S. and Russia signed a new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, or New START, which caps the number of U.S. and Russian warheads deployed on long-range systems, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and heavy bombers. And it includes verification measures such as movement notifications and on-site inspections. Today, Russia released a statement agreeing to a one-year extension and separately to, quote, assume a political obligation to cap the total number of nuclear warheads as the U.S. has requested. But Russia has not publicly agreed to U.S. demands for additional verification.
Joining me now is Marshall Billingsley, Special Presidential Envoy for Arms Control and the lead U.S. negotiator. Marshall Billingsley, welcome back to the NewsHour. Bottom line, do you have an agreement on a one-year New START extension and a one-year cap on all nuclear warheads?
We don't have an agreement yet, but certainly, given the fact that Russia has moved in the direction of the United States proposal for this cap, it looks like the two sides are getting much, much closer together. And I would say we're very, very close to a deal.
The Russian statement today does move closer to where you have been, but it also suggests they will not agree on additional verification that you have said is required to enforce a new warhead cap. So what is that additional verification you're asking for, and has Russia agreed to it?
Well, so that's one of the areas that we're going to need to really sit down and work together to finalize. Russia has said that they will not agree to additional add-on measures. But I would simply say that verification is not an add-on when it comes to arms control. It's an intrinsic part, a fundamental part of any arms control deal, always has been. So, of course, there's going to have to be effective verification associated with this warhead freeze, this warhead cap. And we'll work with the Russians to make sure it's a mutually agreeable solution. But that is something that we're certainly looking for and intend to have.
To verify the cap, the aspects of that, as you know, have to include a stockpile declaration, you have to have additional monitoring, and you have to have an agreement on what a warhead is, what you're actually counting. It doesn't seem like you have any of that yet. So why do you think the Russians will agree to this when you have actually accused them of cheating in previous agreements?
Well, we've documented numerous Russian violations of nearly every arms control agreement they have with us and with the world, which is precisely why verification is going to be so important. But let me also say that verification historically has been something that the Russians also have wanted. And the idea of verification is actually in the materials that the Russians have proposed to us.
We have seen previous agreements that have had verification for missiles, of course, and that's existed for decades now. But we're talking about verification on warheads, which are much smaller. Is that something that you believe Russia is willing to do, to allow the U.S. to inspect to the point where you can find warheads, which some experts I'm talking to can be quite difficult to actually see?
Well, they can, and that's historically been one of the big challenges associated with this kind of approach. And we do believe, and I firmly believe, based on working with our experts at the Department of Energy and the National Weapons Laboratories, that a mix of technology and procedural solutions are available, probably best applied outside the production complexes to make sure that we're not producing an excessive number of warheads compared to those that come in for dismantlement.
Would you agree to extend the separate New START treaty by itself?
Well, the National Security Advisor has made crystal clear that that is a non-starter, but here's why. The New START treaty constrains 92% of the entire U.S. arsenal of our deterrent. It only covers 45% or less of the Russian arsenal. And the Russians are building up in all of these capabilities, these missiles and these theater-range, short-range nuclear weapons that are focused at NATO. And, of course, the New START treaty does nothing and covers not a single Chinese warhead.
It's only 2 weeks from Election Day, and Vice President Biden has made it clear that if he wins, he would extend New START for 5 years without any kind of warhead cap. Is that reducing your leverage?
No, not in the least. First of all, the president, by signaling his intention to pursue this historic approach, and with the Russians now agreeing in principle, that now sets the floor for future arms control discussions. So the Biden camp would have to rethink their entire approach were they to take office. But they're also going to need to be exposed to the kinds of information that we have, particularly the alarming intelligence we have regarding the secretive Chinese nuclear buildup.
When you began these negotiations, you've mentioned China a couple times. You demanded that China sign on to a multilateral agreement, and you also demanded a significant increase of verification before extending New START. Have you failed to achieve some of your initial goals?
No. Well, first of all, we've been consistent and very clear all along that the next treaty must be trilateral. It must include the Chinese. By the way, the Russians have said exactly the same thing, or very close to the same thing. The Russians have said the next treaty must be multilateral. And of course, they would also include the British and the French in their formulation. So we've been consistent on that front. We're not talking about a treaty at this stage. What we're talking about is a political agreement that we would then, over the coming year, move to translate into that treaty. And by that point, we will expect the Chinese to be a participant in that process.
Marshall Billingsley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Good to be with you.
It is 2 weeks out from Election Day, and the rules around voting in certain states are still being contested, including a split decision yesterday from the U.S. Supreme Court. William Brangham has more on the story.
That's right, Judy. Yesterday, in a 4-4 split, the Supreme Court of the United States couldn't agree whether to allow Pennsylvania, which is a major swing state, whether they should be blocked from counting mail-in ballots that arrive after Election Day, as long as those ballots were postmarked by Election Day or earlier. For more on this decision and other looming cases, I'm joined now by Nate Persily of Stanford University Law School. He's the co-founder of the Healthy Elections Project, which tracks coronavirus-related election litigation, and he joins me now. Nate, very good to have you on the NewsHour. Let's talk initially about this Pennsylvania ruling. The Democrats in Pennsylvania said because of the pandemic, we want to give a 3-day grace period. So if a voter mails in their ballot, we should count that as legit if it's postmarked before Election Day, even if it gets here a little bit late. Republicans said no. The Supreme Court couldn't decide, so that the Democrats' position stands. What do you make of this ruling?
Well, it is quite extraordinary that we have not only a decision this close to the election, but a 4-4 decision from the U.S. Supreme Court in a high-profile election case. So it does raise the stakes for the current controversy and confirmation process over Amy Coney Barrett. But the decision itself, as you said, leaves in place what the Pennsylvania Supreme Court said, which is that because of the right to vote in the Pennsylvania Constitution, they thought it proper to allow late arriving absentee ballots to count for the presidential and other elections.
So as a signal, both to Pennsylvania voters, they now know they have this extra couple of days. Is this also to be seen as a signal to other states that are also currently fighting over extensions of deadlines and all manner of election-related matters?
What this is a signal to the state Supreme Courts in other states, because what was at issue was the claim that the Republicans had made that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, by sort of unilaterally extending the deadline, was in a sense behaving like the legislature, and that violated the U.S. Constitution. And the Supreme Court said, well, it gave a mixed signal, but 4 justices said that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision should probably be overruled. 4 said we're going to let it stand, and as a result of that tie, they let it stand. And so other state Supreme Courts, other state courts that are considering other similar kinds of changes to the election laws in their states now have a signal from the Supreme Court that at least so long as there are 8 justices, that those decisions may stand.
This, as you were saying before, this obviously shines a brighter light on the impending arrival of Justice Coney Barrett. Is it just assumed that she will side with the conservatives in cases like this? What do we know about her jurisprudence about voting matters?
I don't think we know for sure which way she would side, but generally she considers herself a textualist or an originalist, looking at the words in the Constitution very strictly. And so the provision in the Constitution, which is at issue in this case, is whether, as Article 2, Section 1 says, each state shall determine in such manner as the legislature thereof shall determine. And so the idea is, does the state legislature have kind of special power that even a state Supreme Court possibly can't modify? And so that is what the more conservative justices on the court believed, and perhaps she would be in their camp.
If the election count is drawn out, does that worry you? I mean, we've heard the president say that if he's not declared the winner on election night, that is de facto evidence that there is fraud in this process. Do you worry about sort of drawing out this process of counting all these ballots in Pennsylvania and elsewhere?
We need to understand that no election has been completely finalized on election night. We have always had millions of ballots that have been outstanding. What makes this election different is that we could have as many as 50% of the ballots that are being cast by mail. That could be 75 to 80 million ballots that will be cast by mail. And so we may have to wait a little bit longer, but it's better to get the result right than to get it done fast. You are right, however, that the more that we are in limbo, the more concern that people will have that, some candidate may declare premature victory, or that there will be allegations of fraud or misdeeds in the absentee balloting process. So that's, in a very thin-skinned political environment in which we're living right now, that's the concern, is that there'll be a lot of conflict over those absentee ballots if it goes into overtime.
So talk to the voters who are out there. We know millions of people have already voted. Many people are sitting on mail-in ballots that are in their house debating, fill this out, mail it in, go vote early, go vote in person. If people are seeing these cases and these ongoing fights in a lot of different states, what would you counsel them to do to guarantee the safety of that their vote gets counted?
Vote as soon as you can. I think that's the message everybody should be sending right now, which is that don't wait until Election Day if you're going to vote in person. If you can vote in person early, please do so. If you're going to vote by mail, make sure you send it in immediately so that you are not victim to, say, difficulties with the Postal Service delivering your ballot. Also, in some states, you can track your ballot. So there's ballot tracking software that states have made available to see whether your vote has been received. And then if there are mistakes in your ballot, if you live in one of those states where it gives you an opportunity to correct those mistakes, make sure to avail yourself of that. But the key thing is to read the instructions on the ballot and to mail it in early.
Nate Persily of Stanford University Law School, thank you very much, and great to have you. We look forward to talking with you more as this election progresses.
Thanks very much.
The longer Donald Trump is president, the more reckless he seems to get.
Suburban women, will you please like me?
When America votes,
here we are.
The world watches. The final presidential debate. SBS World News, Friday at midday.
Uncover the truth behind Latin America's greatest empires. Rise of Empires starts Sunday 7:30 on SBS and on demand.
Did someone say KFC?
I don't care. I love it.
Here at Lilydale, it's not easy raising Australia's favourite free-range chicken, but it sure is worth it. Lilydale.
Beautiful, aren't they? They migrated to Aldi.
They get their fresh stuff from the same place as other supermarkets.
Barbados.
No, son. Australia.
Aussie fruit, veg and meat at Aldi prices. That's good different.
After 4 decades of world firsts, Mitsubishi brings you an Australian first. 10 years warranty with 10 years cap price servicing. Mitsubishi Diamond Advantage. Built and backed for the time of your life.
If you want a fancy cake, you need help from someone who bakes a lot of fancy cakes. If you want life insurance, you need help from someone who compares a lot of life insurance policies. Choosy offers award-winning service you can trust. Simply tell Choosy the payout you'd want for your family and they'll help you compare a range of tasty policies. Go to choosy.com.au or call Choosy now on 13 46 84 to compare, choose and apply. When you want life insurance, don't leave it to chance. Leave it to Choosy.
I started drinking when I was 13 and I'm now 62.
I'm a heroin user, but I'm no different to anybody around me.
I'm here because I want help.
I just want to be free of the chain to the drug.
There is the possibility of recovery for every patient.
He needs to stop because he's probably going to die.
Emergency services. Is your daughter responding?
I just need something to change. I just need something to shift.
We're going to win it. We're going to win it together.
Your children will be proud of you. Your friends will be proud of you.
He's really put in the hard yards.
Stopped drinking for 9 weeks, swapped it for this boat.
And you've got so much to look forward to now.
Addicted Australia starts Tuesday 10th of November on SBS and on demand.
When outbreaks of COVID-19 at meat processing plants in the U.S. slowed production, American wholesalers turned to foreign beef suppliers. Beef exporters in the small country of Nicaragua were happy to fill that gap, actually ramping up production amid the pandemic. But this has come at a high cost for indigenous communities who are being run off their land to make way for cattle ranches. A warning to viewers, this story contains some upsetting images of violence. Nate Halverson of Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting is our guide.
That classic American meal, the hamburger, is increasingly arriving on ships. Imports of frozen beef are up nearly 20% since the coronavirus pandemic began slowing U.S. meat production. And one country has led that surge of imported beef.
Visita Nicaragua.
Nicaragua, that small Central American country, has become the third largest supplier of frozen beef to the United States. Its imports have reached an all-time high during the pandemic, doubling in just 4 years according to U.S. import records I reviewed. But how this little country, the size of Mississippi, exports all that beef comes with a cost.
The supply chain of beef from Nicaragua is anything but clean.
Anuradha Mittal runs a nonprofit, the Oakland Institute, that investigates land thefts around the world. In a socially distanced interview, she described how she went to Nicaragua after hearing that cattle ranchers are stealing land from indigenous communities.
When you got there, what did you find?
The indigenous populations are not just losing their lands, they're losing their livelihoods, they're losing their lives.
In January, a group of armed cattle ranchers attacked an indigenous community in Nicaragua, burning homes and killing 4 men. An indigenous leader shared these cell phone images that capture the destruction and the funerals in their community.
People are dying from violent land invasions, their lands taken away for cattle ranching, cattle which then turns into beef which comes into the United States. Yes, people are being killed.
The indigenous communities own these lands under a landmark international court ruling 19 years ago. Yet, a recent United Nations report reveals that despite the law, indigenous people are increasingly losing their lands and their lives to cattle ranchers.
So this violence is escalating.
Lottie Cunningham is a leader in the indigenous community. I asked her about the cattle invasions.
That is going to cause us an ethnocide. And as indigenous people, we are going to disappear.
As beef exports have increased to the U.S., so have attacks on these small indigenous communities, resulting in whole villages being decimated and abandoned.
In this year, we has more than 10 people in less than 7 months murdered already. And the settlers, them shot with a gun, one girl of 14 years.
Why would somebody do that to her?
To create fear.
Is it safe for you?
No, it's not safe for me. I have suffered death threat. I have suffered intimidation, harassment. But I have to continue this battle because my people is suffering.
The Nicaraguan government is legally obligated to protect the indigenous people from land invasions. But Cunningham and others say that instead, President Daniel Ortega's government is cutting ribbons for new slaughterhouses, which buy cattle raised on the stolen lands and sell the beef to their biggest customer, the United States. The Nicaraguan ambassador, who I spoke to multiple times on the phone, declined to sit down for an interview or address the deadly attacks by cattle ranchers. But Senator Mike Rounds, who has been looking into imported beef, told me in a socially distanced interview that most Americans don't even realize they're eating Nicaraguan beef.
American consumers don't have any inkling as to where their beef comes from today.
That's because U.S. beef importers are no longer required to disclose where their meat comes from after a change in U.S. regulations 4 years ago.
That's right. The chances are very good that it can contain product from other countries and that all that happened was it was brought here to the United States, and if they slice it up here, they can put a product of the USA sticker on it.
Senator Rounds wants all beef to carry country of origin labeling again, and in October introduced the U.S. Beef Integrity Act.
If it comes from a country where you believe that there are human rights violations, if it comes from a country where you don't trust that the quality is being assured, then I think the consumer should have the ability to say, wait a minute, I don't want to buy that.
Dozens of companies import beef from Nicaragua. Thomas Foods is one of the largest, importing beef from some of the same slaughterhouses that Lottie Cunningham said are buying cattle from the ranchers attacking her community. Thomas Foods sells its imported grass-fed and organic beef nationwide, to Walmart, Safeway, Target, even Yale University. On its website, it claims to track production, quote, every step of the way, literally from the farm to the table. But in Nicaragua, that's not true. Like other importers of Nicaraguan beef, it buys from the slaughterhouses, not directly from the farmers, and has no way of ensuring where in Nicaragua that beef comes from.
Well, I'm here at Thomas Foods. The CEO, Michael Forrest, has not returned my phone calls or my emails, but I thought I'd give him one last try to see if we could sit down and hear about Nicaraguan beef imports. Yeah, hey, Michael, it's Nate Helverson with Reveal and the PBS NewsHour.
Michael Forrest never called back, but I talked to company security guards who helped track down a different executive.
I'm John Cassidy. I'm the Chief Financial Officer.
I explained to John Cassidy what I had read in public reports, the murder and violence, and how the Nicaraguan slaughterhouses were sourcing beef from these stolen lands.
If we were to find out that there was something like you just explained going on, that would definitely impact our purchasing decision.
Who within your company's job is it to make sure that that's not happening in the beef industry?
I think that falls to all of us as executives.
Mm-hmm. So if Thomas Foods knew that within Nicaragua the beef was being sourced from these regions where the indigenous people, the brown people, the black people are being murdered, and their land taken from them, you guys would stop buying from Nicaragua?
I believe we would.
Nicaragua?
Yes. So we're not out to exploit anyone.
Thomas Foods emailed me a statement a few days later saying they will continue to import from Nicaragua because their partners have an agreement that commits to zero agricultural activity in protected areas. I asked for a copy of that agreement, but Thomas Foods declined, saying they would have no further comment.
If they're saying that there's actually actions being taken, they're lying.
Camilo de Castro Belli, a veteran Nicaraguan journalist, said the indigenous communities and the cattle companies did discuss an agreement, but it fell apart.
There's no agreement. The cattle industry has been basically worried about their bottom line, and they haven't taken any concrete actions.
De Castro recently filmed these cattle being raised on the same indigenous lands that Thomas Foods said that agreement was supposed to protect. De Castro said U.S. retailers need to take a closer look at their supply chains.
They are being complicit with a system that is hurting people, which is killing people.
I reached out to Walmart, Safeway, and Target. Safeway's parent company said they bought beef from Thomas Foods this year because of the meat shortages. Walmart declined to comment, and Target denied selling beef from Nicaragua. But when I sent details about Thomas Foods' import records, the retailer declined further comment. I asked Lottie Cunningham what she would have Americans do about Nicaraguan beef.
Please don't buy it. That's the way they could contribute with us.
But American consumers can't make that choice until they know where their beef comes from. And so for now, the cattle ranches in Nicaragua are expanding, and the killings continue. For PBS NewsHour and Reveal, I'm Nate Halverson.
Four of America's first 5 presidents were born and raised within a 60-mile radius in the state of Virginia. Those men, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and James Monroe, and their at times complicated relationships are the focus of Lynn Cheney's new book, The Virginia Dynasty. I spoke recently to the former Second Lady, and she started by explaining why she chose to profile these men.
I wrote a book about Madison, and I was interested in how his interrelationships with the other 3 Virginians shaped his ideas. He helped shape theirs. And in the course of the early Republic, the Revolution, these men did amazing things. They, of course, established a republic. They proclaimed independence. They doubled the size of the nation. They made America a continental nation. And so these are stories I think we're ignoring now, and I hope that I can help bring them back to the fore.
And as you point out, they grew up in a 60-mile radius in the state of Virginia.
Exactly. It's quite an astonishing thing to see that much greatness emerge from a small backwater, which is essentially what Virginia was in the eyes of the world.
You make them come to life by writing about not only their great talent, what they accomplished, but also writing about their weaknesses and the disagreements that they had. How, despite all that, did they get done what they got done?
You know, it's interesting that by being together, of course, they sharpened one another's wits. They brought one another to higher ideas. But their quarrels were also very productive, and I think that's a way of sharpening wits, too. One of their quarrels, the quarrels of between 3 of them and Washington, led to a complete break with Washington, which I think people don't often realize. Washington died a pretty lonely man, admired by millions, but with few friends. But out of that break came political parties. The idea that a loyal opposition was a good thing, that presidents shouldn't reign unhindered after they're elected.
There's so much interesting here to explore. Part of it, of course, is the contradictions, and you write about this. They owned slaves, and yet they believed in equality. They believed in liberty. And I was reading at one point, you said Virginia back in 1790 had a population of 516,000 freed people, but it had another 300,000 enslaved people. How were they able to both justify what they believed in and then what they were doing in being slave owners?
Well, they lived in contradiction, and they were fully aware of that. They believed that slavery, that holding slaves was immoral. Jefferson called it a sin against God. But they could never find a way to achieve the complete emancipation that justice required. At the same time, they also lived in this place where a new nation was being created, and they lived in a time when the Enlightenment made clear that people could improve their lot, and they could improve the lots of others. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Washington were all committed to the idea of building a nation on the basis of Enlightenment ideas: liberty, justice, freedom. These were the ideas they used to build, even though in their own lives they contradicted that by holding people in bondage. One point I want to make is that the ideals that they envisaged and the ideals on which the country was based have been praised by some pretty interesting people who saw them as mighty weapons against slavery. You know, Abraham Lincoln, who really didn't have much truck with Jefferson, praised him for putting the idea of freedom at the center of the Declaration because, he said, freedom will keep us from ever falling backward into a non-free state. These ideas were very powerful, the most powerful weapons against slavery one can imagine.
Finally, Lynn Cheney, the growing number of questions out there on the part of many Americans about when we're going to know the results of the election for a number of reasons, the presidential election this year. You and your husband, Vice President Dick Cheney, lived through the 2000 election, the vote recount settled by the Supreme Court. What words do you have for Americans today who are wondering whether the results are going to be accepted, whether either side might challenge the result? What would you say?
Well, it's not the first time that the electoral process has frightened Americans, nor the first time that they fought about it. I immediately think of the election of 1800, which was tied between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson. And before it was settled, there was talk of people arming themselves in Maryland and Pennsylvania. We came through that. I am sure we'll come through this, but we should always be vigilant to guard our liberty and our republic.
And so, to Americans, you're saying because of what you saw in 2000 and earlier.
Well, the country has come through. That doesn't mean it will always come through. But it does mean that we should be maybe a little less panic-stricken than we are, though I don't mean to suggest at all that we shouldn't be vigilant. It's kind of a mixed message, Judy, not a simple one.
Not a simple one, for sure. Lynn Cheney, thank you so much. The book is The Virginia Dynasty: 4 Presidents and the Creation of the American Nation. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, Judy, thank you. A pleasure.
And later tonight on PBS, the premiere of Frontline's Whose Vote Counts. Teaming up with USA Today and Columbia Journalism Investigations, New Yorker writer Jelani Cobb reports on allegations of voter disenfranchisement and how the pandemic could impact turnout in the fall election. That is, Whose Vote Counts. It's later tonight. And before we go, we wanted to let you know about an important conversation online tonight, hosted by Amna Nawaz, Teens, COVID, and Coping. Our student reporting labs teamed up with Well-Beings. It's a public media reporting initiative to explore how the pandemic, quarantine, and remote learning are affecting adolescent mental health. Here's a preview.
I mean, I've always struggled with my mental health, but it's been more prominent than ever. Having to combine the negative thoughts that clutter this space with the stress from classes is just the perfect mix for a disaster, if I'm being honest.
I feel like I'm trapped within my own mind. No one can hear me. I feel like no one knows who I am. I don't like this feeling.
Freshman year is something that's always given me anxiety, so not having a social life honestly isn't that horrible for a more introverted person such as myself.
School and my home life is basically one and the same, so I really miss that, when you used to, school just ends and then boom, you can come back home, chillax.
While I'm trying to stay optimistic, I'm still anxious about what will happen next. I plan to go to school a few days a week for a hybrid learning situation, but things change so fast that I honestly don't know what will happen.
You never really realize how long a day is until you go back to school again and you're wearing a face mask and you can barely talk to anyone and it's just you and your brain, and it's pretty rough.
I struggle with anxiety and depression, and I do suffer with mental health issues. Someone listening and having that love, support, and encouragement is appreciated, and I think that's what I want or sort of need right now.
Such an important conversation. Tune in and join the conversation. It's 8 p.m. Eastern tonight. Visit wellbeings.org. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff.